There we go. Welcome back, folks. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 8 of our Meet the Honors faculty, hosted by the Honors College here at Texas A&M University-Texarkana. My name's Craig Nicashin. I'm the Dean of the Honors College, and I am very excited to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Drew Morton. There he is, who is a professor of mass communication at A&M Texarkana with me. And he's going to be, basically introducing himself to us. We're going to have a little chat about why Drew does what he does, and we're going to start with that. Basically, who are you? Where are you from? What brought you to A&M Texarkana? Give us the spiel.
Sure. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I was basically a first generation college student. My mom took a couple classes at the community college, and I had a summer that I call my Martin Scorsese summer. If you know who Martin Scorsese is, he's a very accomplished filmmaker, American filmmaker, made Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, great mafia movies. But when he was a kid, he suffered from horrible asthma and basically had to spend his summers in bed watching old movies. And I did not have asthma. What happened to me is my appendix broke between eighth grade and freshman year of high school, and that was misdiagnosed. So I spent about 3 weeks with a broken appendix, which is not good, and almost died. And so I spent most of that summer in a hospital bed. And this was around 98, 99, and there were a lot of really good American independent movies coming out. You had Quentin Tarantino with Pulp Fiction and stuff like that. And basically, I just kept sending my parents over to the library and Blockbuster Video to check off, all these movies that were on like the AFI Top 100 list and things like that. And I left the hospital going into high school and was like, oh, I want to be like a movie critic or something like that. And while I was in high school, I wrote for the school newspaper, and I wrote for the biggest newspaper in Wisconsin as kind of their teen critic. And this was early 2000s, and I realized that some of my mentors there were like, yeah, there's not really a future in newspapers. It's looking kind of dicey, and they went off to do other things like, work in public relations and things like that. So I kind of was like, okay, I may have to keep my options open here or consider, like being an English teacher or something like that, teaching high school or something like that. But when I was at UW-Milwaukee doing my bachelor's degree, I realized that I was like, oh, there's this thing called being a professor, and you can teach these things, and it's like school all the time, and I loved school. So I remember telling my wife on one of our first dates, my freshman year of college, she was like, "What are you going to be when you get out of here?" And I was like, "A professor." And she was like, she kind of laughed it off. And I was like, "No, I mean it. I'm going to do this." And yeah, I kind of got really focused on achieving that goal. I started doing things. I enrolled in our own honors program. I wrote a senior thesis that was about 100 pages because I wanted to get some research chops and kind of work with some of the best professors that my school had to offer and get in a good position to go to graduate school, which is what I did. I went to UCLA and moved out west with my family, and eventually ended up at Texas A&M Texarkana. Now, why am I here and why have I stayed here is sometimes the question that I get. Unlike, I don't know, say business or science, there aren't a whole lot of film professor jobs. We're better off than journalists, but not by much. So I when I got here, I found colleagues and an institution that were very supportive of my research. I do some kind of innovative work involving video work. We can talk about that in a little bit. But it was also like a balance of teaching where I really valued that, and I loved that engagement with students because that's what really got me into movies, is being able to discuss them with other people, smart people in a room, just having, good chats about what they're watching. And that research component where it was kind of 50-50. It wasn't just all teaching or all research. If you go to a bigger school, you tend to have to do more and more research and don't get that great time in the classroom with students. So yeah, that's my background, and that's how I ended up here. It's just been kind of hard to leave because it's been a really good environment for both of those sides of my work.
Huh. Oh, very good. I hadn't realized that you had a appendicitis around that age. That's interesting. I did too, but they didn't misdiagnose it. They just took it out, and I was in the hospital for a couple days. And
They said I had the flu, and like they took me to the ER, and the ER doc pressed on it, and this was a day or so after it broke, so you don't have
yeah,
the pain anymore, but you're kind of feeling gross, right? because you're
Being
slowly getting
poisoned. Yeah.
poisoned to death. Yeah. And the doctor, he had the ER doc had the gumption to say something along the lines of, "You should thank me," before he sent me home. And I was
Yeah.
like what? Like you,
That's,
I thought you just did your job. And then yeah, sure enough, they sent me home, and 2 weeks later, they finally ran like an MRI or
yeah.
something on me where they were like, "Oh man, like this is real bad." And I was like, "Where's that doctor? I'll find him."
He was on the golf course. So I don't know much about doctors. But so you already kind of answered this next question a little bit, but I'm gonna tease it out in a different way, which was essentially kind of like what got you into your discipline. But I would say, yeah, what is it about film studies specifically within that context of mass comm and criticism and everything that really kind of attracted you and made you want to make it your life?
I think at that time, again, if you put yourself in a time machine and you go back to the mid 90s and early 2000s, you had movies that were coming out that were really playing with structure, with storytelling, with form. We don't get as many of those anymore because they're made by places like Netflix and Amazon, and they want the clicks, they want something that's easy to watch and not particularly challenging.
Hmm.
But in the mid 90s was really a halcyon age for American independent film, and a lot of American independent film tends to break a lot of those rules that we tend to hold dear. So, I remember watching Pulp Fiction for the first time, and I was like, "Oh, this movie's told out of order, and I have to use
Right.
my brain and put it back together. It's like solving a puzzle or something like that." Or Memento, Christopher Nolan's first movie, which is a movie that's told backwards because the protagonist has memory loss, and so it kind of puts you in that headspace. And so it was really just kind of understanding what movies could offer beyond, as much as I love Star Wars and I love Batman and all those things, it was like beyond just like those that formula that you get with most Hollywood film. And I really wanted to, dig into that. And for a brief moment, I was like, oh, I could be a filmmaker. And then I remember watching all these documentaries on how these folks were making these, and like there's this great documentary on the Magnolia disc by Paul Thomas Anderson, another American independent filmmaker, and he's got to deal with like child actors and like large crews, and I'm like, this is too much like interpersonal management of like a large like I'm like, you're like a cruise ship captain. I don't want to do like I thought it was just like a couple friends and they were doing all this, and I'm like, this is too much. So yeah, those dreams of making movies kind of went by the wayside, and they have manifested in other ways. But yeah, it was basically the idea that I was really interested in stories that could be told in a range of different ways, and that's bled over to interest in English. That was one of my majors when I was doing my bachelor's degree. Or I'm a big video gamer, so seeing how video games can kind of play with storytelling as well. But it really just comes down to like how can you break storytelling conventions? That's what interests me.
That's cool. You mentioned earlier, sort of, you do some of that in your own work as well, some of your kind of innovative approach to research and so forth. Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was at UCLA, I had a professor named Janet Bergstrom, and she did these things back when there was this time behind me where we bought these things called
Yeah,
DVDs.
I still do. Yeah.
Before we streamed them and put them on our computers and didn't have to worry about finding a copy at Best Buy or something. And in order to support this form of physical media, these studios would pay people to make things for them and do like scholarly essays and documentaries and stuff like that. And one of my professors was making these, and she taught a class on it, where you basically did like it's hard to you found a way to take your scholarship and make it into a documentary movie rather than writing a paper or writing a book. And I thought that was really kind of intoxicating because it kind of scratched that itch that I had to begin with of being a filmmaker, but also took some of the scholarship that I was doing because I really am interested in film form, visual style, things like that. And let's just face it, writing about visuals is kind of dry and boring, and it's really hard to do well. And I was like, well, what if you could just like show this instead of trying to describe it to people? And that's what we kind of came upon, and we have since called it videographic criticism. At the time, we called it DVD essays. But yeah, it's essentially how can we take a conference paper or a book chapter and turn it into a documentary film that's maybe 20 minutes long or something like that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I've made my career on, and one of the reasons I'm glad to be at A&M because it was a really innovative form of scholarship to begin with, and me and my colleague Kevin Ferguson, who's at City College of New York, I think we're the two first people in the field to get tenure based on portfolios that were largely based on videographic criticism and non-traditional scholarship, which meant a lot to the field, and it's helped other people do it. So I'm glad to have carried that torch for other folks.
That's cool. You think about it, like we're so innovative and interested in engagement when it comes to teaching, but the vast majority of research in our fields, I mean, I'm a historian. Um, what do you mean there's another way rather than writing a long form book about this? Heretic. Yeah, no, it's fascinating that we accept that you wouldn't just do that in class anymore. You wouldn't just stand up there and read your read a
And,
paper to your
and
students.
And to your point, it's free. Like my book, you can buy my book, right? But it's like published by a university press, and it's probably like $100, and it's like written in a vernacular that's kind of hard to understand. Whereas the nice thing about these videos is you can kind of shoot down the middle, where you've got an audience of scholars that you're speaking to, and you weave that in, but you can still make it accessible enough and not have literally the price tag. It's all open access. It's all free. You don't have to have a subscription to a journal. You don't have to be at a university. You can just go on Vimeo and see the stuff that we're making, right? So that's really nice. It takes it out and makes it much more accessible and tends to make more of a indentation with the general public rather than kind of being paywalled off in the ivory tower, as we call it.
I think the dozens of people who read my book would disagree. Well, maybe the dozen, maybe the five or six. Anyway, or at least bought it, and those are mostly friends and relations. So, what attracted you to joining the honors faculty?
Again, I was an honors student when I was a undergrad, and there were so many opportunities that I got at UW Milwaukee in that program. I took because the program there was a little different than ours insofar as they would bring in visiting professors and have people who were on staff constantly. So you'd have somebody who was just invited to teach there for like a year who might have been like an accomplished professor of philosophy at like Harvard. And they just were trying to like access the libraries or the collections that we had. And they're like, yeah, I'll teach an honors class. So I was taking really weird honors. Like I took like God and the Soul in a class on ancient Chinese philosophy where I had to read like Mencius and Confucius. Like it's totally outside my wheelhouse where I'm like I probably could have done with a little more like Socrates and more of the classics, but again, you were getting these opportunities to learn from people who were teaching their bread and butter in their specialties in a really deep and rich way, and you just had access to these top tier scholars. So at the time, one of the professors in the film program, her name was Patrice Petro, and she actually was like the president of our major academic organization. And she was like, "Yeah, I'll advise your thesis and work with you." And I was like, "Man, this is like something that like is normally reserved for like graduate
Yeah.
students. And you have to work really hard to get in the presence of these folks. Normally, you got like a TA that you're working with. You're not really working with a accomplished professor." So it was just to try to take advantage of all those opportunities. And so many professors would come up with really great assignments and field trips. Like we had a professor of English who would take us like he's like, we're gonna go see this weird art movie today. And a couple weeks later it'd be like, we're gonna go see Shakespeare. And it would just be like he again just wanted to expose us to everything just to kind of keep us curious. And that meant so much to me that I just kind of wanted to instill it in other folks and just give that gift back.
Yeah. I mean, again, that makes a lot of sense. And our next question is essentially kind of like, yeah, what do you want students to get out of honors? But yeah, I mean, I think that opportunity, and especially that sort of grad school model, to some extent, we have tried to create that. One of the advantages of A&M Texarkana is we still have a pretty close faculty student ratio anyway. But yeah, in honors, we have a lot of folks kind of working one-on-one, which is fabulous. So, with that in mind, what would you like honors students in general, I guess, to get out of their experience?
What I really like about it from a student perspective is that unlike a class where you're basically in your major or even just a GE, right? You're surrounded by people with different points of view from different majors. And just because you major in mass comm doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed better in one of my classes. I sometimes tell, the students this, where like I've had nursing students who come into a film class who've never had a film class before, and they just like take to it like, a fish to water, and they can do it really well. Whereas I'll have a mass comm student maybe who's less interested in movies and likes podcasting more, and they can't do it as well. So it has nothing to do really with what your major is to begin with. It has to do with, again, your curiosity. And one of the awesome things about being in an honors class is just that the population is so varied that the viewpoints are varied, and the discussion doesn't become a monolith where everyone's saying, I agree with that, and that's the same point, right? Because it doesn't have that kind of, I guess, nepotism to it,
Mm.
that kind of incestuous like intellectualism where it's like, oh, we've all taken this class. Let's tell him what he wants to hear. It becomes much more kind of interesting and varied that way. And again, that reminds me a lot of grad school where you'd take a film class and then be an architecture student in there who's like, let's talk about, the architecture of the film space. And you're like, oh, this makes sense that you would think about it this way. An optometry student who's looking at color or something like that. So it really just makes the conversation much more broad and thoughtful, and really gets you outside of your comfort zone. So that's why I think it can be really rewarding as an honors student. And it's also like it's such a privilege to be a student of like the liberal arts where you can just like I try to say this to my students, and I think they think I'm crazy, where I'm like, you're basically retired. You can take classes on anything. You don't have like, I mean, I realize some of you, work part-time jobs and things like that and have obligations, but it's like you have this immense privilege just to take things that you want to learn about and spend your day reading books and watching movies and thinking about, things that your parents are probably like, I don't know if that's got real value, but it ultimately makes you a more well-rounded person, because you have to think about like how like art fits into society and how politics affect how art works. Like, like the First Amendment, it's a law that basically tells us what kind of art we can make, right? Or, business relationships can change how art is formed, as I mentioned earlier with Netflix. So like all of this has real world applicability. It's just you have to think about it in this kind of this varied kind of way.
Right.
And I think that's the real kind of gift of taking an honors classes. It puts that in the foreground by having that diverse population in the classroom.
Well, very good. All right, our last question is possibly a short one, possibly a long one. I don't know. Is there anything you wish you knew as a student that you know now, right? If you knew then what you know now, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Now, you might have been a good student, to be fair, so maybe that.
I was pretty good. There were moments where I didn't do the reading and I wish I had tried more. Like it'd be a different question if it was grad school, because I remember my first semester of grad school and I was like, whoa. Because I remember being an undergrad and it's like, oh, you get an article and it's 20, 30 pages and you read it by the end of the week and that's it, right? And I remember trying that mentality with grad school and I was like, oh, I'll read it the night before. And I had this one professor, he gave us all the PDFs on a CD-ROM because he didn't want us to have to buy anything. And I'm like, oh, it's a PDF. How long can it be? And I double click it. It was the whole book.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's 6 o'clock at night, and I have to read this before 10 in the morning, and it's 300 pages. So I guess it would just be, time management, which I'm normally pretty good about. Reading the syllabus, keeping track of things. And again, just I think one piece of advice that tends to work for a lot of folks is that this is preparation for the real world, right? Um, like working with me is kind of like working with a coworker or a boss. Like they have expectations. You have to fulfill them. If you can't fulfill them, you need to communicate with them and seek help, right? You can't just assume folks are going to read your mind. So being real outgoing and just being honest and meeting with your professors during their office hours, because sometimes it's easier to have a conversation than sending an email because it goes back and forth forever.
It
So
can.
that would be my advice.
All right, very good advice. Thank you. All right, well, that's basically about all the time we've got. So thank you once again, Dr. Morton, for joining us on the most recent episode of Meet the Honors Faculty. And yeah, I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care.
Take care.